Hello everybody. Today we will be doing a presentation on Constantinople in Byzantine Empire. We will be discussing topics such as politics, social life, economy, and military. We will be starting with politics. Main political characteristics in Constantinople. The first one is absolute monarchy. Absolute monarchy means that every emperor is chosen based on their bloodline. They are the descendants of the previous emperors. Sometimes exceptions can be seen, and in the Byzantine case, because of the military takeovers and unexpected deaths without the successors, cause exceptions to be made. Moving on to the next important characteristic is the Senate of Constantinople, which we will be discussing more about in a minute. The next most important thing is that the Constantinople is the political capital of the Byzantine Empire, which means it is the most important city. In the picture, we can see an illustration of Constantinople and how it could have been looked at its time. Now, the Senate of Constantinople. The Senate was very similar to the Roman Senate. It's seen as the Byzantine politics and imperial system was a continuation of the Roman system. They did not try to change everything from its roots, but they continued using the similar system as the Byzantine Empire is a descendant of the Roman Empire. The Senate had a limited power. In this case, that means that they cannot make decisions on their own on important matters without the approval of the emperor. Emperor does not need to elaborate their decision-making with the Senate as well. Even though it was limited, the Senate still had power, but starting from the 7th century towards the 13th century, the power declined. Gradually, it was vanished. In those years, emperors were gaining power and they ruled without the Senate. One of the most important political conflicts came from the religious politics. At first, the empire was a paganist empire and they were worshipping the Roman gods. But after the increase in Christianity, the empire eventually accepted Christianity as their religion. Iconoclasm was a very important conflict in Constantinople. Iconoclasm means breaking icon. The further explanation is some people saw icons was the reason why Christians could not win over Muslims. As Muslims, they did not have icons, so started conflicts. Churches decided that they will no longer have any icons and they banished them. But it did not last long. After 100 years or so, they started to accept the icons again. Moving forward, the Great Schism happened. Great Schism is the division of Christianity with Orthodox and Catholic churches because there was a constant conflicts in Rome and Constantinople churches. So they divided the churches as Orthodox Church and Catholic Church. Lastly, the conflicts with Christianity and Islam. With the new rising power of Muslim Arabs in the east, started the conflicts in Constantinople. The Arabs were a threat, so the church took an action, which resulted in with the Crusades at the end. But they still could not stop the rising power of Muslim Arabs. In the picture, we can see the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia was one of the largest cathedrals in all Christianity. It was seen as the religious center of Christianity as well. After Constantinople was conquered by Muslims, it was transformed into a mosque for them as well. Now, we will be moving on to the social life.
In order to understand the social life in the Constantinople, first let's start with the class differences. There were two distinct groups in the society, honestiores and humiliores. Honestiores was the rich side of the society and humiliores was the others. This class difference was vividly seen in the clothing people wore. Mostly the rich wore silk, which was imported from China and Phoenicia, and then it was started to produce in Constantinople also in the 6th century. Nobles could wear clothes dyed with purple, which was a very expensive color. Mostly the emperors wore. It wasn't common within the society. The Byzantine people also liked to wear jewelry from gold, silver, and gems. Certain high-ranking officials had their own distinct clothes of office. The color of their cloak, tunic, belt, and shoes, or the particular design and material of a fibula could indicate visually the wearer's office. The houses of the wealthy was multi-roomed. They had inner courtyards, bathrooms, gardens, fountains, and even a small chapel inside them. The public rooms of such houses had marble floors and walls decorated with mosaics, while those private rooms, such as bedrooms, which were usually in the second floor, had painted interiors. Even bigger houses had segregated places for only women that men couldn't enter. And poor people lived in multi-story buildings. Their bricks and stones were usually taken from older damaged buildings in order to have a better look. Their exteriors were covered in plaster and painted the walls with bright colors and sometimes with bold geometric patterns. Bishops could teach to boys or private tutors if they were wealthy, if they were coming from a wealthy family. On the other hand, girls learned spinning, weaving, reading, and writing. There were higher education options for boys in the big cities, such as Constantinople. Lower class people mostly had their profession of their parents. On the other hand, upper class men could be lawyers, accountants, diplomats, and officials if their parents were wealthy and if they got higher education. Also, there were traders, merchants, and bankers. Those people were also wealthy, but they weren't from the upper class. They gained their wealth with their jobs, not from their parents. On the other hand, unfortunately, women were expected to marry, look after the children, household property, and manage the slaves. They couldn't be lawyers, accountants, diplomats, officials generally. So let's look into the street life of Constantinople. It was very entertaining because when one went out to the streets, he or she could find jugglers, acrobats, beggars, food and drink vendors, idlers, prostitutes, fortune tellers, lunatics, holy monastics, and preachers. Citizens could shop in markets which were held in dedicated squares or in the rows of permanent shops which lined the streets of larger towns and cities. Shoppers were protected from the sun and rain in such streets by colonnaded roofed walkways, which were often paved with marble slabs and mosaics. Some shopping streets were pedestrianized and blocked to wheel traffic by large steps at either end. While we are speaking of markets, let's look in a more detailed way. There were two fish trade systems, one for wholesalers, another for retailers. Grocers, taverns, and bakers were located throughout the city. Butchers were instructed to travel beyond Nicomedia to the Sangres River in order to obtain better prices in buying the animals from the sheep and goat farmers. Apart from a wide range of meat, seafood, fruit, and vegetables, the Byzantine shopper with money, of course, in their purse might be tempted to buy spices, perfumes, incense, soap, medicines, textiles like wool, silk, linen, and fur, jewelry, pottery, glassware, brassware, silver plate, small art objects carved from wood or ivory, and even slaves. In order to understand the religious activities, we can talk about the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. It was constructed in the 6th century. It was designed to be the major basilica of Byzantine Empire and held the record of the largest dome in the world until, of course, the Duomo in Florence was built in the 15th century. Talking about Hagia Sophia is important because the major difference of Byzantine Empire from Roman Empire was its religion, which was Christianity, of course. This church was very close to Great Palace and the Hippodrome itself, so it held an important place in Constantinople. Now let's look to the Hippodrome of Constantinople. This hippodrome was used for chariot racing throughout the Byzantine period. The hippodrome was also used for other public events such as parades, public executions, and the public shaming of the enemies of the emperor. Hippodrome provided an opportunity to show the people of the emperor's power, wealth, and generosity in lavish public entertainments that went on for days at a time, often coinciding with public holidays, so everyone could come and see what was going on inside the hippodrome. Unfortunately, following the Fourth Crusade in the 13th century, the hippodrome fell out of its use and its spectacular monuments and artworks were looted.
Economy in Byzantine Constantinople. Byzantium has a geographical position in Taiwan with the seas. Dominance of the Mediterranean, Aegean, and Black Seas gave Byzantium a significant advantage in trade. By holding the Marmara, Byzantium was able to reach the Mediterranean, the Aegean, and the Black Sea, and by dominating Istanbul, it almost brought the East and West together. After the death of Emperor Constantine in 330, Istanbul was called Constantinople. Constantinople is an important city due to its geographical location, and this city must be well defined against enemies. For this reason, walls were built in the city and its defense was strengthened. It is not surprising that Constantinople was then the capital of the economy as it is today. People brought from different places, especially from Thrace, are settled here and its population is crowded. The crowded population has, of course, provided the economy. Constantinople was the most populous city center in Europe. Feeding and keeping this population happy was a major political issue. For these reasons, everything was planned so that there would be no such problem here. The establishment of guilds and some arrangements made through them are steps taken in this direction. Trade developed in a short time, especially in the city, which also has an important port like the Golden Horn. Some foodstuffs from Anatolia, Egypt, and Syria were also brought to Constantinople. Starting from Constantinople, the highway reaching Izmit, Eskişehir, Konya, Adana, Aleppo, Damascus, and Egypt was one of the busiest roads used in Byzantium. The opening of Constantinople to the Mediterranean, the Aegean Sea, and Black Sea not only made a trade center but also contribute to world trade. In particular, Constantinople is important as a customs center and also a customs revenue gate due to commercial activities. In this respect, it also provides an economic contribution. The goods coming to Constantinople by way of the Black Sea were controlled by the customs officers at certain points in the Bosphorus, and those arriving via the Mediterranean and the Aegean were controlled by the Çanakkale Strait. Custom tax was imposed on all export and imports. Constantinople was one of the places that provided the flow of products to the country, which did not cut off Byzantium from world trade. Constantinople has been the center of life in every respect for centuries. The most important reason for this undoubtedly its location that connects Asia and Europe. However, the fact that Constantinople seems to represent the whole of Byzantium by itself is that proof that there is not enough power in other centers of Byzantium. Silk production has an important place in Byzantine trade. This economic activity was carried out by the established guilds. Bright colored silk fabrics produced by Byzantium were made in Constantinople. Thessalonica and Greece, after Egypt and Syria, fell into the hands of the Muslims. Glass thread is also important in Byzantine trade. Glass was also used in Byzantine architectural works. However, it was an expensive product. Glass products made by glowing by the Jews in Constantinople were quite famous. The production of glass, one of the representatives of wealth and luxury, started in Byzantium. This started to become widespread in 19th century and made a great contribution to the empire in economic terms. I prepared the information in this presentation by making use of master thesis Bizans İmparatorluğu'na Ticaret Mehmet Ertan Bamyacı and Bizans döneminde Anadolu Murat Baskıcı works.
The Byzantine army was the primary military body of the Byzantine armed forces. It was a continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire, and late Hellenistic militaries maintained a similar level of discipline and organization. It was among the most effective armies of Western Eurasia for much of the Middle Ages. Emperor of the time was seen as commander-in-chief, and Constantinople was the headquarters for the army. Throughout the history of the empire, the Byzantine army saw various reforms by different emperors. At the time of Justinian I, the Byzantine army went through its first major reforms. To cope with the ever-growing threats against the empire, most seriously against the Persians, Justinian replaced old Roman order with mostly traditional Greek forces. The Strategicon, which was a manual for commanders written in Marco's reign. Manual gives us an overview of the Byzantine army, describing the formation, clothing, and what type of gear soldiers had. At the end of the 6th century, classification goes as Imperial Guard, stationed in the capital, the Comitatenses, field armies which replaced old Roman legions, the Feodorati, composed of mostly barbarian volunteers, formed cavalry units, the Bokoler, another cavalry unit which composed of mostly Hun and Gothic volunteers. The Temata system was found in Middle Byzantine period of 7th century to 11th century. Tematas were administrative divisions in which a general had military and civilian power. The system was found as a response to large territorial and military losses during wars against the Muslim Caliphate. This system decentralized far-away armies and allowed the landed generals to react quickly to local revolts, raids, and skirmishes against enemies. 5 original tematas are the Armeniac theme, stationed in old areas of Pontus and Armenia, the Anatolic theme, which covered Central Asia Minor, the Opsician theme, covered northwestern Asia Minor, the Thracian theme, stationed at the western coast of Asia Minor, and the Carabisiani, which occupied the southern coast of Asia Minor and Aegean Islands. But thematic armies guarded the provinces. Emperor Constantine V formed the imperial tagmata units in order to counter frequent revolts of thematic forces. Over time, the tagmata became professional standing forces, forming the backbone of the empire and loyal to the emperor himself. They were stationed in or around the capital. Tagmata was comprised of 4 main units: the Sukolai, most senior units, the Excobitio, the Arithmos, which recruited amongst thematic troops, and the Hikonotai. At the end of the 11th century, the Byzantine army was in a poor state, but with Alexios I's ascension to the throne, this had changed. Rulers of the Komnenos dynasty created a new army after a period of infighting and civil strife. The Komnenos army, named after their creators, was a heavily centralized one. It was a highly effective, well-equipped, and well-trained, but its biggest flaw was that the new army relied heavily on competent leadership, which was diminished after the Komnenos dynasty was no more. After the Komneni, Angeloi ignored much of military affairs. This resulted in corruption and lack of competent leadership, which Byzantine army was heavily relied on. Because the quality of regular forces and local leadership started to decay, army became dependent to foreign mercenaries over time. The Angeloi neglectance and disintegration of the thematic system concluded in the collapse of the Byzantine army, which played a significant role in the collapse of the Byzantine state as a whole. Throughout its foundation and existence, Byzantine army employed foreign mercenaries. The ability of Byzantine emperors to employ mercenaries from all over the world demonstrated the wealth and prestige of the Byzantine army. The mercenaries often supported the main army, but at times, mercenary units formed the bulk of the army as well. Barbarian tribes are one of the mercenary types more frequently used by the emperors. The Varangian Guard formed by Scandinavian mercenaries, was the most famous unit of the Byzantine Empire. We have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening to us. Have a nice day.